Why this title? The ID in Uganda. I don't want to go back into a lot of history, but in 1986, I was 16 years. Now, depending on how people count their age, somebody would just have talked and say I was 17. And you see all that everywhere. And editors do that a lot, most of the time. But my background is in math. I started in mathematics and then went into computer science. So, before you celebrate that birthday, you are not that age. I was born on the 18th of May. So if I was born on 1st of January, on 1st of January, like 1986, I would have been 17. But only times 17 on the 18th of May 1986. So in 1986, when President Museveni took over, or when he took over power, I was 16 years old. And we all got excited. But before then, even as young kids, we knew what was going on before. And these people were thinking, they were looking at issues. So when I discussed with my fellow academicians, like Professor Baryamureeba, Professor Sewanya, and others, they said, but in those times, we used to discuss these issues as academicians, not as politicians. So I said, why don't we start these debates? That the politicians can pick some of the things we are discussing. So now I'm 45. This year in May, to be exact, May 18th, I'll be 46. So I don't want to wait until I'm 60 to start discussing some of these issues. Because when you look at President Museveni and his colleagues, they started discussing these issues when they were less than 30 years of age. And even in 1986, were below the age of 30. Yet they had a vision for this country. So we are saying we can also contribute because we are another generation of Ugandan citizens. And that is why we are talking about this title, the ID in Uganda. We cannot have an ID in Uganda in 2015. We can't have it in 2016. It may be several years ahead. But as Ugandans, we need to begin a discussion. Each one of us has a perspective about the ID in Uganda. So that's what this whole lecture, this whole book is all about. And today, we are not launching this book. We will launch it in May. We launch it in May because we want to have views from the public. Ever since I launched this book, I didn't launch it, sorry. Ever since this book was published and put in the bookshops, many people bought it. Now, one of the people who bought this book is an archbishop in the Catholic Church where I grew up. And that was the church and the state. I said, oh, okay. I will write about it. So today I'll briefly talk about the church and the state as part of my presentation. But there are other issues that are emerging. I'm sure Professor Bani would like to write a chapter about something, which I won't talk about. So we want to really build on. We can have several books. We can have one book with several chapters authored by different people. But we want to have a discussion. We want to begin this discussion. So having said that, I don't have a lot of time. So I want to use my time effectively. So that is the overview of my talk. I'm going to just briefly go through a brief prologue, which part of it I've already talked about. But I'm going to talk about only the political transitions. I'm going to talk about separation of powers. I want to talk about the national budget priorities. Some of us have been managing institutions, big institutions. And we know how to balance the different sectors within an institution. The infrastructure, the human resource, even the other issues. So we feel that as a country, we need to have a debate on the national budget priorities. Where should we put our money? I'll talk about Uganda's global competitiveness. They say figures don't lie. So if you want to be competitive as a country, what is it you need to look into? And I'm happy that I have a PhD holder who did his PhD on global competitiveness. He will tell us about it. He's in the middle. So I'm going the case of honor. So I also talk briefly about corruption. I'll talk about the church and the state. The discussion is going to go on and then there will be question and answer. But basically the discussion and Q&A will be moderated by Michael. So that is basically an overview of what I'm going to talk about. My first slide. There are things you take for granted. It's like when you are born in a very rich family, having pocket money, having breakfast, having lunch, having supper. Those are things you take for granted because they are there. It's a given. But I want to say that ever since we got independence, we have never had a peaceful political transition. It's something many Ugandans take lightly, but another group of Ugandans take seriously. So if you look at from 1962 when we got independence, our first president was President Mutesa II. So that was our founding president. But on 2nd March 1966, Obote overthrew him. So there was no transition. Again, they say what goes around comes around. On the 25th of January 1971, Obote was again overthrown. I mean, he was also overthrown by Idi Amin Dada. And then Idi Amin Dada declared himself the right president. And everybody who knew Idi Amin Dada knew that he would never be defeated. He was there for life. But 8 years later, on the 11th of October 1979, he was no more. Then, Rule came in. Because Amin was overthrown by the combined force of Tanzanians and Israeli forces. There were several of them. I won't mention them. Now, Rule came in, but in less than 3 months, people say 69 days, you can call it anything. He was also overthrown. Benaisa came in, he was also overthrown in a very short period. And then finally in 1980, we had elections. And President Milton Obote was elected as president for the second time. So, some were happy, others were not. So, 5 years later, he was overthrown by his own army, and Rutwa took over. We had the Nairobi Peace Agreement, some people call it the Peace Jokes. And on 26 January 1986, January is an interesting year. But just separated by 1 day, we had a government being overthrown. On the 26th of January 1986, Rutwa was overthrown by NRA, which was headed by President Museveni. But if you look at that part of history, these coups were the order of the day. And we had so many presidents in such a short period. Now, President Museveni came to power in 1986, to be exact, on 29th January 1986. And on 29th January 2016, you have served as president for 30 years. Now, like I said, if you are born in a rich family, there are things you take for granted. You don't have to worry about pocket money. You don't have to worry about lunch, because everything is there. But some people who have been in the past, who have had their properties destroyed, who have seen some bit of instability, they are now asking questions. After 30 years, what's going to happen? Are we going to ask yourself questions? You now have a president who is in his 70s. Next year will be 30 years old. He's going to contest. Most likely he will win. What is going to happen after President Museveni? How will he go? How will he go, and what's going to happen thereafter? So many Ugandans are having these questions. But because all of us belong somewhere, we don't want to talk about these issues. So we are saying, for us as people in the academia, let's begin this discussion. And then maybe it can inform the political discussion. So those question marks, each one we have to think through them. You have several answers, but which one? Each answer has an implication. Now, for some of us, I've told you that this year I'll be 46 years old. There are certain things we have seen. We've been to several countries across the globe. We are here in this country called Uganda. We learn things even outside our own discipline. When you talk about separation of powers in this country, where you are looking at the executive, the judiciary, and the legislature, and you talk about it, it leaves a lot to be desired. We think this can be improved. I'll talk about it later. When we look at national budget priorities, we feel that they are skewed towards infrastructure, energy, defense, and security. Somebody will say, when the budget is read, education is number one or number two. You have to look at what is that sector you call education. How big is it? If you're just looking at the figure, then you are getting it the wrong way. So we feel that this is what it is. And as I will talk about it later, even in 2014, at the workshop for the National Budget Workshop, National Budget Stakeholders Workshop, the President clearly said that defense and security are the two sectors that should have the highest priority, because without an army you cannot have an economy. So we are saying, maybe we need to discuss these issues. When you look at the youth marriage, it is more of a demographic bomb than a demographic dividend. We have so many that are unemployed. That's why I think so many groups coming up. NRM unemployed youth, over poor youth, so many are coming up. So we need to ask questions. How can we address these issues? Maybe what I didn't say at the very beginning is that we as Ugandans, whether you're in the village, whether you are in cities like Kampala, wherever you are, you can make a contribution. Each one of us can make a contribution to make this country a better place. So some of us who have the capacity can write a few books. Like, I never thought of writing an autobiography or a memoir. But when I left Mackay University and I was meeting former students, people in office, they say, "Barry, I have your CV." I say, "What? You inspire me. You're my role model." I just say, "CV." I said, maybe I should write something more than a CV. That's why I came up to write. But I realized actually I could not write an autobiography. I didn't have the time. So I picked a few areas in my autobiography and put it in the memoir. And that's why I did that. So many people have bought that book and say, now I know. The CV is not enough. You have inspired me even more. So I did that. So we are saying each one of us can make a contribution to the betterment of this country. Now, when you look at the sectors like education, health, agriculture, they actually aim. But there is a lot of progress that has been made. They are ailing sectors. I'll give you one example. In 1984, That's when I was, I think, finishing P7. I had a business with doctors in Ivan, at Ivan Hospital. I used to sell to them eggs. And so, one of the evenings, they organized a party. And they invited me. And I went. And that's the time I listened to music like Rice and Peace. Remember that music? And these white doctors, they were busy dancing, so happy, you know? You know? But one thing I vividly remember is that we had at least 12 medical doctors, white, at Iwanda Hospital. In 1984. Go there today. You'll find one medical doctor who is also part-time. He's not there full-time. So, the population has gone up. What is happening? So these are some of the hard questions we have to ask ourselves. But this is our country. So what I'm saying is that a lot of good things have happened, but also a lot of other things we need to think about as Ugandans and see how best can we move forward. And so some of us, we are saying we need to begin this discussion. When you look at issues like our global competitiveness, it's at its lowest. And I'll show you the figures. People say figures don't lie. If you look at issues of corruption, I want to call it a growing concern. But we all know that when you look at even the report by Transparency International, Uganda is ranked as the most corrupt country. And so if that happens year in, year out, we can't say maybe there is an error. These perceptions might actually be real. Now, the other issues we need to look at, people who know about social contracts, people like from this field of sociology, humanities basically. We know that us as citizens have a social contract with government. There are certain demands that we have, like we need quality education. We have a right to water. We have a right to quality education, a right to, doctors or health services and so on. So, again, if you are to use the media, like New Vision and so on, they tell you there is a patient about 2 days ago went to a hospital or a health center and found it closed and just collapsed and died. Just because you go to a health center, you're in need of services, you find it closed, you just collapse. Just because of that. So these are issues. But you see, the government cannot do it alone. We have to work with government to improve on these issues. There is the element of the church and the state. And this has been a talk in many circles. What can each do and what is it that each can't do? And I told you that this was not in the first version of the book I wrote, but actually the book we are going to launch in May, I have a chapter on this and other chapters, because I'm getting feedback. Even today I'm going to get feedback. I'm going to get more views, more people wanting to write chapters and so on. But being a Catholic, I'll talk about this from the perspective of a Catholic. And I know Professor Baryamureeba will talk about it from the perspective of Muslim. And others will talk about it from the perspective of being Protestants. But we know that us as human beings, we are under two authorities. One is the state, another one is the church. That is an undeniable fact. And I'll talk about it as I wind up this discussion. So, I felt when you look at these issues, that maybe we need to have a discussion on all these issues. Now, let me go back to 1986. That's when our president, our loved president, General Museveni, on the 29th of January, became president. Up to today. In 1986, I was 16 years old, and today I'm now 45 years old. I'm 80. And in 2016, our dear president will have served for 30 years as president. And he's also in his 70s. So if you look at countries that have term limits, What it basically means, you have missed 2 generations of presidents. Now, one of the things that is in the public domain that NRM cadres or NRM people used to belong to NRM and have made their ambitions, presidential ambitions, public. Many of them are no longer in NRM. But I just use the word isolated. Have been isolated. But for me, having been in institutions where there is a lot of intrigue, people who come out are not the one you should worry about. You need to worry so much about those who have not come out. So, for me, as a Ugandan, I'm worried about the many presidential hopefuls within NRM and UPDF and the others who have remained silent. So, those who have remained silent, you don't know what their plan B is. And that's why the 3 question marks I put at the very beginning. Us, as Ugandans, want to ask ourselves questions. How is it going to be? So, if you are born in a rich family, having breakfast is a given. But these are issues we need to think about as Ugandans. I want to briefly just have one slide on implications of overstaying in office. And I want to give you a quote from Gloria. It says, sometimes being a friend means mastering the art of timing. Sometimes being a friend means mastering the art of timing. And I can see my friend Professor Baryamureeba smiling. Because he has had so many friends of his. Whether they have timed or mistimed, it's something for another day. There is a time for silence, a time to let go, and allow people to hire themselves into their own destiny, and a time to prepare, to pick up the pieces when it's all over. So if you look at, and if you're using NRM as a party, you look at people like Eria Kategaya, Kizza BSJ, you look at Mama Babas and others, several others. You will read through this and you'll just, as Ugandans, you can think through and get your own meaning or your own interpretation out of this. Now, one of the things I have to say, that when you overstay in office, one of the things that can happen is that you can actually die in office. So you are not able to hand over to another person. The other one is that you can reach a certain age and you are either incapacitated or you are barred from continuing. That is the reality. And for a president, that is in our Article 102. The other one is you can actually compete and lose, even when you have been very popular. So now I don't want to look into the future. I can say, like, for example, our own president can compete in 2016 and lose. That's a possibility. In mathematics, we talk about probability. It doesn't mean that actually when you say it will happen, no. I know President Museveni has high chances of winning, but you have to look at the other side that you could actually lose. It's like when you go into a football match, that happens. Again, the other one can be, looking at our history, you can have somebody losing power through a military coup d'etat. The other element of constitutional removal from office. You can, for example, have a president re-elected, the current president in 2016, and you get a parliament that is like 60% anti. And through the official provisions, they make life hard for a president and they remove him or her. Those are realities, those things can happen. So we need to think about all these as Ugandans. Now, before I continue, I want to just give you one thing. What does the Bible say on age or about age? And me, I'm just giving these realities. I'm talking as an academician. Because that's what I am. The Bible in Psalms 90 verse 10 says that as for the days of our life, they contain 70 years. You can go on. But if you have good health, you can go on up to 80. That's what is in the Bible. Which means the moment you cross 70, as human beings, we will not be able to achieve as much as we would have done in our earlier years. That's the Bible. And you see, there are things you take for granted or you don't think about. How do we take an oath of office? If you're a Muslim, like my friend Baryamureeba, he holds the Quran in the right hand. And you swear. If you're a Catholic or Protestant or Seventh-day Adventist or call it born again, Pentecostal, you hold the Bible. What does that one signify? I'll leave it to you to think about it. So, what does our Constitution say about age limit? Public servants, majority of public servants, if not all, they retire at the age of 60. The Chief Justice retires at the age of 70. As per our current Constitution, as long as you are not above 75 years of age, you can contest as the president. You are eligible for election as a president. Which means you can serve up to 80. That's what is in our Constitution. But looking at what these offices entail, as I show in the next slide, for some of us we are saying, and this is not for now, for the future, that we need to really think about this age limit and ensure that a president, the head of state, who is an executive president, by the way, does not serve above the age of 70. So that means that somebody can only be eligible to contest when you are at the age of 65. And I'll tell you why. If you look at our own constitution of the Republic of Uganda, the president of Uganda, who is an executive president, is supposed to be the head of state, the head of government, commander-in-chief of the Uganda People's Defense Forces, and the fountain of honor. In addition, the same constitution provides that the executive authority, people know executive, the authority of government of Uganda is vested in the president. So when you talk about ministers and so on, but actually the president is the executive. So when you have an executive president, it means that power and authority in this country is concentrated in one person, who is the president. Now, you may wonder why we are saying maybe this person will not go beyond 70. In other countries like Israel, like UK, Germany and so on, they have ceremony of president. These even gone up to the age of 90 and plus, like in Israel. The past president, I think, retired when he was about 92, 93. So your ceremony, it is okay. The Queen of UK, she's I think almost 90 now, around 88. And it is okay because there's an executive prime minister. But where you have executive heads of state, like in the US, in Uganda, in UK, you used to have old people in those old days. If you look at like President Truman, he left office at the age of 88. That was then. Today, when the elections and you're above the age of 65 there, you watch CNN, something, but this guy is a bit old. And that will work against you. And I bet age will work against Hillary Clinton if she runs. That was then, but now they are very conscious. You saw Obama came in as president, and you can see how he is right now. He's an executive president. So what I'm saying, ceremonial heads of state are usually old, and that is okay. Even the Pope is old. At times, the Pope has to die in office, even at 101. But executive heads of state, in many countries, they come in when they are young. But when you don't have term limits, they stay on and become very old. It is very rare to find a country electing a president for the first time who is very old. But a few cases happen, depending on what they are choosing against. Now I want to speed up. I don't want Michael to stop me. Implications of African culture, but I'm going to time myself. Implications of African culture. I want to just put this right for you to reflect on. It is not direct, but I want you to reflect on it. If you ask a Ugandan, will you, as a Ugandan, will say that term limits and age limits should be entrenched in our constitution. If you went out and carried an opinion poll now, or even did a referendum, they will tell you that they want age limit and term limit entrenched in our constitution. But then if you ask them the question, as a Ugandan, that whom will you vote for President 2016, majority will tell you President Museveni. Yet, the term limits they are talking about is like 10 years. You get it? 2 term limits. But if it's past that, as long as the law allows him, they will vote for him. When you say in 2021, whom will you vote for? A good number of them will still tell you President Museveni. But by that time, you have passed the actual age limit in the constitution. But as long as the law does not stop him, they will still vote for him. That's our African culture. I witnessed it myself at Mackay University. When I was director dean, every time I was competing, there were other people. I never wanted to contest with them because I still have a chance. But the moment they say your term is over, people will come up, so many. Wait for Professor Bari when they say his term is over. Everybody will come up. But now they can't. So, that is the reality. But as Ugandans then, how do you go around this? That's why we talk about separation of powers. You want the parliament to say we are going to think for the people and this is what we have to do. And we hope they will do that. Now, these PowerPoints are not go through them. But I want to tell you issues about term limits. If you have that book, you'll find a lot about term limits. But I will just say a little bit about this slide. That term limits offer an automatic check on consolidation of power. This rule makes it easier to replace ineffective leaders. Leaders may be popular but very ineffective. As a result of election irregularities, as it happens quite often, in many African countries, including America also, you remember during Bush's time, there were irregularities. Al Gore was supposed to win, but he didn't. So, it is very hard for incumbents to lose elections. And therefore, term limits at times can be one of changing leadership at the top. But I'll just give you briefly about advantage of term limits in a brief. One of them is that to prevent incumbents from using the benefits of the office to remain in power indefinitely. When you have an office, you have resources, you have power. You use that to remain in office. You'd be a fool not to do that. So again, term limits make room for fresh candidates and encourages participation. I can assure you, if President Museveni said I'm not contest this year for president, you will see more than 50 people in NRM coming up to contest. But when he says he's contesting, you will see 1 or 2. Maybe as independents. So that's what happens. Also, term limits stop politicians from making choices so as to prolong their career or stay in office. You've seen some of those, like creation of districts, and several others. I don't want to talk about them. But some of them you find that the leaders know that these are not necessary, but they will do them because as long as they are bringing in votes. Now, I want to tell you something about what happened in the United States of America. You know President Franklin Roosevelt was president during the Second World War. And he was a very, very popular president. They tried to remove him, they could not. He served more than 2 terms. But finally, in 1945, he died in office. When he died, his deputy, or vice president, Truman, took over. And he's one guy who reinstated the term limits, but they were reinstated actually by the majority of the Republicans in the Congress. But he was president then. And they were ratified in 1951, and later on, he left office, And the next person who was casualty of this was a Republican. That was Eisenhower. And the next one was Ronald Reagan, who was very popular also. They would have had like 4 or 5 terms, but they didn't. But Americans did this to ensure that a president in America cannot serve more than 2 terms. And they entrenched this article in the Constitution because they felt it was so important. And even today, most Americans feel proud about it. I don't want to be a prophet, but I want to tell you that after President Museveni, I can assure you term limits will be reinstated and they'll be entrenched. But he may surprise us as Ugandans, and during his reign, he ensured that actually we have term limits again at the entrenched. But if it doesn't happen, it will happen after him, immediately after him. Because Ugandans want it now, but they don't want to do it unless the president wants it. So when we talk about whether you have term limits or not, it is very clear that we all need term limits, especially in a society where voters are not required to be educated about their simple susceptibility to demagogues that makes implementation of term limits absolutely mandatory. Otherwise, you can let the population be enslaved by, if you have a very manipulative politician, they can be enslaved. So, what am I saying in regard to term limits and age limit? I think as Ugandans, we need to reinstate presidential term limits, 2 consecutive terms of 5 years each. We need to entrench presidential term limits in our constitution. We need to entrench age limit in our constitution such that one vacates office of president after turning 70 years. That's what the justices of the High Court do. They vacate. And if you look at the constitutional responsibility of a president, an executive president, that is in order. But this calls for orderly political transition. Now, I told you about the president of America, Franklin Roosevelt. And President Museveni is likely to be the Roosevelt of Uganda. Because people are going to try to defeat him, they may not. But finally, he will leave office. And when he leaves, then we need a true man who will reinstate term limits and institute various social and economic reforms. And that's what Truman did. You can read about all this information is available on the internet. So we need also to place institutional structures that can guarantee orderly political transition. You know, in Uganda today we don't have these institutional structures. If you look at our constitution, the vice president only deputizes the president, has no other duties conferred upon him by the constitution. Cabinet ministers share the responsibility with the permanent secretaries. And in most cases, they don't have much to do. Accounting officers are the permanent secretaries, so you don't have like a person with that executive capacity to say a minister can take over as the head of state. We lack governors of regional governments. If you look at America, the governors of the states are potential presidential candidates. We don't have them, but we are hoping we could have regional governments. We don't have senators who are very senior, like in an upper house. If you have regional governments, then you can't deal with senators. Maybe we also need to look at successive CEOs like in NSF and other places who can be politically oriented to take over in the future as heads of state. Now, when you talk about the federal system of governance, most people think about federal as something that's related to Uganda. Federalism is a system of governance in which the same territory is controlled by 2 levels of government: the federal government and the regional government. And this is very, very important. The overarching national government governs issues that affect the entire country, but the regional government concentrates on the regional issues. Now, Uganda as a country, we are working towards, with the rest of the East African member states, to have the East African community, which is kind of a federal government. Now I want you to look back in 1994. Rwanda, around April, it had genocide. By June 2004, it was a failed state. No, 1994. It was more or less a failed state. But if you look at indicators within East African community, economic indicators, corruption indicators, competitive indicators, even within education, Rwanda is ranked #1. So if you had a federal system of government in Uganda, depending on the leadership you have in the different regions, Uganda will develop at different rates or paces. And that's what we need. So when we keep talking about federal laws for Uganda, we are missing the point. Even when you have a federal system at the national level, the regional governments will still function. You have seen it in universities. The university may be collapsing, but when some faculties are doing so well, if they are well federated. Now in a constitutional monarchy, federalism is one thing that can actually help us, or regional government that can help us sort out some of the issues. In a constitutional monarchy, we've read about Buganda. In 1955, the Kabaka of Uganda and the governor of the Protectorate of Uganda, Andrew Cohen, they signed an agreement. I don't want to use more than the time I'm supposed to use, so let me move very fast now. They signed an agreement that kind of established a monarchy within Uganda, where the Kabaka was not supposed to have political or executive powers. Now, if we had a federal government within Uganda, the Kabaka can be the head of state of Uganda. And this thing about Eviafe, that political question within Uganda would be solved. So federalism can help with that. If you go to southern Uganda as a region, people there don't want Obugabe or anything. You go to western region, they want it. So they were Nyoro, Batoro, and the Bakonyi will decide on how to move ahead with that. So these are some of the issues you can benefit from. Now, these objectives of regional governments, I'll not talk about them. These slides are now available on the net. But when you have a federal government, you need to look at the issues of the parliament. You cannot remain with the parliament the way it is. You need like an upper house of parliament, which is the Senate, that will take care of the issues to do with regional governments. And also need the House of Representatives that will look at how you distribute resources between the regional government and the central government and other issues. But all this is documented. But we also feel that this is something we need, and if it is to happen, you need a small house of Senate with like 20 senators. And you can have 2 representing each region, male and female, and have the other 10 distributed between political parties in order to strengthen the lower house of parliament. So that if a presidential candidate loses an election, can easily come in as a senator representing his party, if he has a certain percent that can allow him to come in, or can allow her to come in. And then the lower house also, using Uganda's population, could have a house of about 200 MPs. Now, we also need to look at issues of an effective and efficient cabinet. If you are going to empower ministers, the vice president and so on, to really kind of be looked at as possible who can actually take over, we are talking about succession. So we are proposing you can have a cabinet of about 15 cabinet ministers, plus an attorney general, government chief whip, and so on. And we're also proposing that the office of the prime minister should be phased out, and those powers given to the vice president. Now I want to talk briefly about, like I said, I'm now winding up. I saw Michael trying to write a cheat for me, so I always watch him. Separation of powers. Separation of powers is a political doctrine of constitutional law under which the 3 arms of government, others call them branches, the executive, the legislature, and judiciary, are kept separate to prevent abuse of power. I want you to really think about that one, to prevent abuse of power. This is also known as the system of checks and balances. So you give each arm of government powers to check the other two arms of government. And I would like to say that a good constitution should not give any arm of government too much power. Any arm of government. And I think our current constitution is a bad constitution. It has given too much power to the executive. And that's why it is normal that we can even actually stay for 5 years without a chief justice and a deputy chief justice. And it is normal. But you need to ask yourself a question. Would it be normal for us to stay without a vice president and a president? Moreover, in the judiciary, it is the same, one and the same person holding two positions. So if you are talking about three arms of government, and the top highest positions are held by one person who is acting, how can they check the other arms of government? How can the judiciary check the other arms? We need to think about those issues. So let me move. Now, some of the shortcomings in the Ugandan situation is that we have the president who is also the chairperson of the ruling party. And it becomes worse when the ruling party has the majority of the MPs in the parliament. So when you have control over the MPs, you control the caucus, and the caucus also usurps the powers of the parliament. Now, you have like two arms completely under control of one other arm. So, what are some of the issues that Ugandans are thinking about in terms of strengthening? We feel that positions like the Chief Justice and the Deputy Chief Justice, the Constitution should make it clear that they cannot be vacant for more than 3 months. Like, I don't think you can not have a parliament in place for even a week. The Constitution does not allow it. So we need to come up with such a thing. But also, you want to empower cabinet like the way it is done in the US and other powerful democracies, to ensure that the cabinet has powers to actually impeach their own president when they feel so, like there is abuse of office or incompetence. So these are issues we have to look at. And also to ensure that like the speaker, deputy speaker, leader of opposition do not hold the positions like in their parties. And also to ensure that the party chairperson does not qualify to be presidential candidate, because that's where we have issues. Now as I wind up, let me talk briefly about our proposed national priorities. Like I told you, that as a country we have to prioritize. If you look at the African Union declarations, they said that for the health sector we need to put at least 15% of our national budgets. When it comes to agriculture, they said we need to put at least 10% of our national budget. Education is a sector that touches on every other sector. But when you look at the percent that go to these sectors, they have been so low. So we are saying raise these percentages. Like to education to at least 20%, health to 16%, agriculture, water and environment to 11%, and so on. This is very, very, very important. As much as we are still talking about other sectors like security and defense, you cannot have an economy unless you have an army. That's what the president said in 2014, last year. But these other sectors are so important. You have to realize how much force you are going to use if you have an employed youth. You have people writing about health services, education services that are poor, and all other things, unemployment and so on, underemployment, all those. When you talk about global competitiveness, you look at those 12 parameters, and Uganda is ranked today 129th out of 148 countries and territories. What this one tells you, and this is by an international body, this Global Competitive Index by World Economic Forum. So when you look at this and look at each of these indicators which I have done, Uganda is doing poorly in most of these areas. And it's because our education system is poor, our health system is poor, all these areas you see. But when you look at countries like Rwanda, they are doing very well. So we need to look into these issues. Now, corruption. This is the second last slide. I will just give you Uganda's position. It is 142nd out of 145 countries ranked globally. No, out of 175 countries. But among these other countries that Uganda beats, you have countries like Burundi, South Sudan, Somalia, that are failed states. So it means actually we are among the worst ranked countries. So why is this the case? Corruption has eaten up our society. That's why we're having poor equipped schools, poor health services, counterfeit medicine, poor infrastructure. When it rains, you see so many accidents on our roads. You see buildings collapsing, incompetent workforce, elections where they are decided by money and so on. So these are very, very serious issues. We have seen several corruption scandals. I don't want to mention them. But if you remember Chogam, you remember the office of the Prime Minister, you remember the bicycle scandal, and so many others. All these are serious corruption scandals. Now, the strategies to curb corruption, there are many. I may not go through them. But in that book, we have put some, and you can also add some. So that the book we are going to launch in May has much more. But I want to say one, that we need to reinstate term limits if you are going to curb corruption. And I'll give you this quote, that politicians and diapers should be changed frequently and all for the same reason. It may sound funny, but sends a serious message. You know, when you overstay in office, it also becomes hard at times to control corruption. Because the same people who are funding you to remain in office are the ones who are going to come back after you have won to say we want to get our money back. How? We need some contracts, we need this, we need that. So, and it also becomes hard to secure political will to fight corruption. So there are other issues to do with salaries and remuneration. If a head teacher of a secondary school is earning 1 million, and a driver in one of the organizations earning 2 million, why can't this secondary school teacher pay himself or herself another 3 million shillings on top of the 1 million to feel good? So those are some of the issues. So I can see now you can't see anything. I don't know whether this is an electrical problem or, or something else has happened. So we need to secure the political will to fight corruption. We need to put in place like a Salaries and Remuneration Commission. We need to enact laws that can facilitate the recovery of wealth acquired through corruption. We need to make corruption very unattractive. The other one, we need to demand for high standards of accountability from public officers. The strategies continue. But one of the things I would like to mention on this slide is that religious leaders must be seen to act even publicly by refusing gifts linked to corruption. This requires us to discuss the relationship between the church and the state, remembering that Ugandans have a social contract with the government. Because if you are going to accept a gift that will compromise you from executing your roles or your mandate, then there is a problem, and that is corruption. So, now, I'll just tell you briefly about, I want to talk about the church and the state. But I'll begin from, I thought I'll talk about the Catholic Church, because I belong to the same church. Many of you, I know you know about the Vatican City State. That's a state, within Italy, that is recognized internationally by all bodies. It has a state and government, state departments, judicial government bodies, international relations, structure of governorate. And when we look at the governorate, there is a president of that, there is a secretary general and so on. Like any other country, that state is recognized. But we also have the Holy See, which is the episcopal see of the Bishop of Rome, who is the Pope. And this one has ambassadors across the globe. Even in Uganda we have one. Most of the ambassadors are the rank of archbishop. The president of the Vatican City State is a cardinal. So, if you are talking about like a Catholic church, having ambassadors across the globe, having like churches everywhere across the globe, you need to understand what they're talking about. And those ambassadors, we call them the papal, like he's called a papal nuncio or apostolic nuncio. And it's actually a permanent diplomatic representative. And their rank is always above the other ambassadors, because they are very, very senior people. So, and they represent the Holy See. Basically, they represent the Pope in states and international organizations like UN and so on. Like they also have an ambassador, permanent ambassador to the UN as a country. So what I'm saying that both the church and the state have a say in many of these issues: human rights, marriage, education, health, services, employment, security, and so on. Why am I saying this as I wind up? The government charges taxes, isn't it? The state, the church, you have to pay tithe or an offertory and so on. Every month, a fraction of your income goes to the church, another fraction goes to the state. The church, right from the very beginning, like in Uganda, has been involved in education, in health, and other sectors. So the church is so concerned about our economic health as citizens and other issues, education and so on, because they have to benefit from that. So there is no you can detach the church from the people. But I want to give you a few points as I wind up from Archbishop Kiwanuka pastoral letter, which was written in 1961. And this is what he said: that God Almighty has appointed the church of the human race to two powers. And this is according to the Bible: the church and the state. Then I'll read the next one below. Whatever is consecrated to God, all matters concerning souls, religious and moral matters, are governed by the church, who judges them. On the other hand, whatever concerns government of people in temporal matters belongs to the realm of the state. So it is clear what belongs to the church and the state. But we are under the authority of both the church and the state. And I want to give you another verse, which is now from the Bible. If you're Catholic, Protestant, or another person swear by that, by the Bible. In Romans chapter 13, verse 1, it says, "Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God." Now in the Quran, Professor Wanya will tell us what is there. And I want you to remember our Uganda motto, "For God and my country." And when we are taking an oath, what do we swear by? So, since these things are there even from the days of Saul and David, you cannot run away from them. Remember Saul, when he defied God, he said, "I've also rejected you." And David became king. So it is real that these two states, we are all under the authority of God, and God has allowed the two to coexist, the church and the state, and each one of them must play its part. And today, when we talk about the church and the state, a big part of the people in the church are not playing their part. Yet they expect us within a month to give a part of our income to the church. Yet they expect us to be economically okay. They expect us to have good education and so on. But they have to really contribute to these areas. So I would like to say that God is central in whatever we do. Every leader takes an oath of office holding a Bible, the Quran, in the right hand. And that is very symbolic. But for Uganda, we need to remember that even our motto is "For God and my country." And for God and my country, I thank you.